I pray that I might speak to you this morning in the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Please be seated. So I have a friend who absolutely loves the stories that we get in the Bible about Mary and Martha. These are the two sisters of Lazarus, the dead man that we encounter in today's gospel. She's fascinated with Mary and with Martha, and particularly the story about the time where Jesus went over to their house for dinner, and Mary, she sat at Jesus' feet the whole time, listening and learning from listening and learning from Jesus. She didn't do anything to help get dinner ready. She just sat there listening and learning from Jesus. While Martha, on the other hand, she worked herself up into a frenzy. She was so distracted by her many tasks. She was rushing around trying to get dinner ready that she didn't have any time whatsoever to sit and chat or to learn from Jesus, who had come to their house. And my friend will often comment as she reflects on her own life. She'll often comment, I've been such a Mary today. All I've done is sit on the couch by the fire and pray and read scripture and read and journal. That's all I've done all day. I've got nothing else done. And then other days she'll say, I've been such a Martha today. I have been so distracted by all the things I needed to do today that I didn't have any time to stop, to pray, to read the Bible, to journal, to reflect, rushing here, there, and everywhere. So some days she feels like Mary, some days she feels like Martha, some days she finds herself longing to be more like Mary, some days she finds herself longing to be more like Martha. But that's what we do, isn't it? That's what we do. Or at least I think that's what we should be doing. When we hear a story in the Bible, when we hear a story from the Bible, we should try to see ourselves in that story. We should try to figure out which character we most identify with, and which characters in the story that God might actually be calling us to learn something from. And usually the characters that we feel the furthest from are probably the ones we should be paying attention to, because God's probably trying to teach us something there. Today we're celebrating the Feast of All Saints. And by virtue of our baptism, because of the sheer fact that each one of us has said yes to being a follower of Jesus Christ, to living the way that he shows us how to live, by that sheer fact that we have said yes and come through the waters of baptism, each one of us is called to live the life of a saint. We're all called to be saints. But what does that actually mean? What does it mean for us, for you, to be called to live the life of a saint? What does that actually look like in practical terms in how you go about living your daily life? And so with those kinds of questions in mind, we turn to that gospel reading that we just heard. It's a story that involves Mary and Martha and Lazarus. So let's take a few minutes this morning to explore which of these characters in this story helps us to better understand what it is to live the life of a saint. And to help us do that, I want to share some of a reflection that was offered by David Luce. Which character in this story helps us to understand what it is to be a saint? Is it contemplative Mary, who, having her heart wrenched by grief because of the death of her brother? Is it contemplative Mary who gives voice not simply to a question that she asked of Jesus, but it's an outright lament, maybe even an accusation that she launches at him? She says, Lord, if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. Is it that kind of a vulnerable relationship where we feel that we are able to pour out our hearts to God? That is what it means to live the life of a saint? Is it busy Martha, who fills her days with a life of serving others, who even though her brother has died, was still able, in the midst of her grief and in the midst of her anguish, she was still able to make such a profound confession of faith when she said to Jesus, "Yes, Lord, I truly believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one that's coming into the world." Is that what it means to be a saint? Even when life gets difficult, we're able to hold on to our faith and make that kind of a confession? Or perhaps our focus should be on Lazarus, the one who gets called to come out of the tomb. Lazarus, he was dead. But now Lazarus stands there as the literal embodiment of Jesus' promise of resurrection that he offers to all of us. Lazarus, one who death has taken, but could not hold on to. He serves as a reminder and a testimony to Jesus' power over even death. And if you think about it, each of us has met people like Lazarus. Each of us in our own lives, we've met people who have come through extremely difficult circumstances in their own lives, and they've been led into something completely new, where hope has been restored. These people in our own lives, they can serve as a Lazarus for us. They can serve as someone who points us to the possibility of resurrection and allowing us to live with hope. So maybe that's what it means to live the life of a saint. To serve as a visible symbol of hope to others. But of course, the main character in the story is Jesus himself. The one who gives life, who calls us out not just out of death, but he calls us to live our lives not even in fear of death. The one who weeps for Lazarus and his sisters, and for all those who stand by and don't understand or believe in God's promise of eternal life. The one who, in raising Lazarus, started the chain of events that would ultimately lead to his own death. The one finally whom death itself cannot contain. Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life," as he promised Martha earlier in that gospel. And then he demonstrates his faithfulness to that promise. First by raising Lazarus, and then on Easter morning as he too is raised from the dead. So is that what it means to live the life of a saint? Someone who is willing to sacrifice everything in order that others might have life. So again, which character in this story helps you to understand what it means for you to live the life of a saint as a follower of Jesus? It could be any of them. And it probably depends on what is going on in your own life right now as to which character is going to resonate with you the most closely. But all of them offer their own insights on what it is to be a saint. But there's another possibility. There is another character, or characters in this story, that often get overlooked. And these characters, I think, really help to shed even more light on what it is for us to live the life of a saint. These aren't the main characters in the story. These aren't the stars of the show. They have no lines in what we just heard, and we never once get to know their names. If you want to know what it is to live the life of a saint, then spend some time reflecting on those that after Jesus calls Lazarus to come out of the grave, spend some time reflecting on those who Jesus calls to come out from the crowd, and he says to them, "Unbind that dead man and let him go." Because in that moment, Jesus is inviting these seemingly insignificant bit part characters. Jesus is inviting people like you and people like me to partner with God in the work of resurrection. He is extending an invitation to them and to us to live the life of a saint by participating in God's life-giving work. There is a lot of grief. There is a lot of suffering in our world these days. Way too much of it. 11 faithful individuals killed in the shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue last week. A plane that takes off from Indonesia crashes, throwing countless lives into grief and sorrow. Here at St. Jude's, this past week we gathered together on the Feast of All Souls to remember and to pray for our own loved ones who have died. And as part of that tradition of gathering on that day, we invite people to come forward and to light a candle in remembrance of those that they loved who have died. There were so many candles that were burning this past Thursday night, I thought we were going to have to call the fire department. There really is lots of grief. There really is lots of sorrow. Many of our own loved ones right now, your friends, your family, many of our own loved ones are going through tough times. Cancer, unemployment, addictions, broken relationships, mental illness, loneliness. And then if we look at the wider landscape of the world we are living in, so much hate. So much hate. So much intolerance in this world. Way too much of everyone trying to make sure they get what they're due. There is so much injustice and exploitation going on right now. There's so much sorrow, so much darkness. And quite frankly, this is one of the greatest barriers to the life of faith. This is one of the greatest barriers that people will point to and say that is what prevents them from being able to believe in this God of love that we come to worship week in and week out. So often people point to all the death in our world, all of the sorrow in our world, all of the suffering that we see people enduring in our world. They point to all of it. And they say, where is your God of love? And yet, I think this story about the raising of Lazarus offers an answer to that question. Where is our God of love in the midst of all the grief and sorrow? Where is our God of love in the midst of all the suffering? Our God is right here in the midst of it all. When Lazarus died, what did Jesus, the Son of God, do? He showed up. He showed up. He entered into and shared their grief and their sorrow, and the Son of God wept with them. Our God of love has entered into the brokenness and the suffering of our world, and our God is a God who weeps right along with us. He was fully present with them. And then he began to fulfill God's promise of resurrection. From within their sorrow, from within their grief, from within their suffering, he began to shine the light of hope from within their darkness. Despite their objections, despite their doubts, and despite their outright disbelief that there was anything that Jesus could do in that moment to transform their reality, Jesus said to them, "You've got to trust me. Even though that stench of death, because Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days, is so strong, meaning this situation is completely hopeless, you've got to trust me. Roll that stone away," Jesus said. And he commanded Lazarus to come out of his grave. And then he invites each one of us, all of God's would-be saints, to partner with him in doing God's work of bringing new life to this broken world. Jesus invites his saints to unbind people, to tear off the grave clothes of whatever it is that is keeping them trapped in a life of death. Unbind people from death and let them live. We might not be the main characters. We might not be the stars of the show in this world. We might not have any lines in the drama of life. And we might never be recognized for what we do. But our love, our kindness, our compassion, our generosity, our mercy, and our actions, our lives partnered with God, will transform this world and bring new life. When we show up, we show the world that God is fully present and at work through us. Wherever people resist hate and fight for the dignity of every human being, our God is there. Wherever people speak out against racism, anti-Semitism, classism, sexism, or hate or intolerance of any kind, our God is there. Wherever people feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, and welcome the stranger, no matter where they came from, our God is there. Whenever we comfort those who are grieving, visit those who are sick, spend time with the lonely, our God is there. What we do in this place and in our relationship with one another, it matters profoundly. It has eternal consequences. When we in our own lives walk the way of love, when we walk the way of love, we show the world that God dwells where it hurts the most. God's love shows up, and God's love will change the world. And that is what it is to live the life of a saint. And so may we be a people committed to unbinding others from whatever it is that is keeping them from living the life that God created them to live. May we unbind others and become partners with God in the work of resurrection. Thanks be to God for the lives of all his saints. Amen.